Getting closer and closer to Joint Base Andrews. Momentarily, it will arrive. There will be a formal departure ceremony for the 41st President of the United States, whose casket will be brought aboard that plane, that presidential aircraft, to take the whole entourage, the family, including the casket, to Houston, Texas, where there'll be, Jake, another memorial service tomorrow morning before final burial at the George H.W. Bush Presidential Library at Texas A&M University.
That's right, and there are different contingencies of organizations from George H.W. Bush's life that are at Joint Base Andrews right now, individuals from the U.S. Secret Service, individuals from the Points of Life Foundation. We're told that the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, General Dunford, will lead the honor guard there, along with the chiefs and chairs of every branch of military service. There will also be a performance of Going Home that will be played by the Air Force Band that was chosen by George H.W. Bush himself. One other note, Willie Geist just tweeted this. John Meacham, the reporter and historian who wrote that powerful biography of George H.W. Bush and just was one of the four men who eulogized the former president at the National Cathedral service. Meacham had an opportunity to read his eulogy to George H.W. Bush, obviously in the preceding months. And the response, according to what Meacham told Geist, is George H.W. Bush said, "That's a lot about me, John." Which of course it is. It's a eulogy for a former president. Of course it's going to be, but that gets at the humility and modesty of the man that we've been hearing so much about. And here we have the procession, the motorcade, arriving at Joint Base Andrews.
Jeff Zeleny, our White House correspondent, is there at Joint Base Andrews. The presidential hearse is there. The motorcade has arrived, but this is the advance that we're seeing right now. But momentarily, we will see the presidential hearse, and everyone is getting ready. What are you seeing on the scene for us, Jeff?
Well, Wolf, we are seeing the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff and other chairmen of the different branches of service arriving here in their motorcade. They will be taking their position on a chilly and windy tarmac here at Joint Base Andrews. You can also see the Air Force Band is in position, as well as the color guard. They will be receiving, again, the casket of George H.W. Bush. We also have several invited guests, former Secret Service agents. You'll remember George H.W. Bush had 12 years of Secret Service agents, of course, and continuing on to, he went out of office as vice president, as president, so many of them here. But Wolf, we're also told there is going to be, of course, Hail to the Chief one final time, but the song Going Home. That is a familiar hymn, a favorite of President Bush's, Dvorak song, and the lyrics are quite poignant. And this is indeed will be the final trip home of hundreds, if not thousands, of trips aboard Air Force One, aboard Air Force Two, and other planes here that he has taken throughout his long life of service. So he'll be, of course, at destination Ellington Field in Texas as they arrive here, but one more ceremony on the ground here before he is sent off.
We're told, Jeff, the motorcade has now arrived at Joint Base Andrews, and this formal departure ceremony is about to begin. There will be full honors, of course, rendered, and as you point out, once again, ruffles and flourishes. Hail to the chief, a full presidential send-off for the 41st President of the United States. You see the top military brass. They have gathered there to pay their respects to George H.W. Bush himself, a World War II hero who volunteered for the U.S. military at the age of 18. On the day he turned 18, fought in World War II, and the military clearly paying their respects for this extraordinary person. We learned a lot, even at this stage, Jake, in those eulogies that we just heard. There were nuggets there that were new.
There was a lot of information, and obviously these were four people that knew the former president quite well. His biographer, a fellow world leader, former senator who worked closely with him, and then, of course, his oldest son. Much of it was about the dignity of the man, his grace, his modesty, his humility, his insistence on treating everyone like you would want to be treated. A lot of values that make people wonder where they are in Washington today. You know, Alan Simpson referred to the high road of humility in Washington is not a road that is often besieged with traffic or words along those lines. And yet George H.W. Bush, even in that anecdote from John Meacham about reading his eulogy to the former president before he delivered it, obviously, reveals that. That's a lot about me, he said. It's a lesson that he was taught by his mother, who always told him to avoid the big I ams. Don't talk about yourself. It's something that some of his aides and advisors think might have hurt him politically. His refusal to go to Germany after the fall of the Berlin Wall, his refusal to participate in a ticker tape parade in Manhattan after the success and victory in the first Gulf War. A man who obviously had a healthy sense of self, being a president at the time, but somebody who did not like gushing about himself, liked having the light shine on others, as one of his eulogers put it.
And I noticed, and I want to get your thoughts, that when President Bush walked in, he went over to the former presidents and the former first ladies, shook their hands, went down the aisle, thanked them for coming, and it seemed to, you know, there you see that when he was arriving there, it was a beautiful gesture, I thought, on his part.
It was, and as I said before, I mean, he really is now the patriarch of this Bush family, this Bush dynasty, a family that started with his grandfather, Prescott Bush, who was a senator from Connecticut, that was then assumed by his father, George H.W. Bush, not the oldest son of Prescott Bush, but the one who assumed the leadership role in the family, and now it falls to Bush 43. So that didn't surprise me. It was a nice gesture, him shaking the hands of the four formers that were there, Trump, Obama, Clinton, and Carter, thanking them for being there on behalf of the Bush family.
Yeah, and it was nice that everyone was there to participate. This is what George H.W. Bush wanted.
It was, and obviously it's a little different than other big funerals we've had this year. The funeral of former First Lady Barbara Bush in, I believe, was it February or April, perhaps? In April. The funeral of Senator John McCain. Events where not all of the presidents were there, notably, of course, the current president, Donald Trump, not invited to McCain's, and he did not attend Barbara Bush's. And
you know, when he got there, you know, he shook hands, President Trump, with Michelle Obama and former President Obama, but there was nothing else beyond that.
Yeah, and a lot of people reading a lot into that about Hillary Clinton not looking at President Trump. Why didn't President Trump shake this person's hand? Why didn't this person shake President Trump's hand? That's probably for another time and place to have that discussion, but obviously a lot of tensions in that pew, things that have been said, and obviously, look, there are a lot of tensions between the Bush family and President Trump.
There's the presidential hearse arriving at Joint Base Andrews. I want to go back to our White House correspondent, Jeff Zeleny, who's there on the scene. Jeff, this formal departure ceremony is about to begin.
It is, Wolf. We are seeing the motorcade, as you can see here, the hearse there with those two American flags, as well as that poignant presidential seal, followed by members of the Bush family. Of course, President George W. Bush and Laura Bush are directly behind the hearse, as well as other family members, as you can see, filing through there. They will be taking their place on this windy tarmac here at Joint Base Andrews, and they will, of course, be having one more ceremony. This indeed is one of the key stops. We will see the casket again being taken out of the hearse and loaded onto Air Force One. And I'm also told that similar to other presidents like Ronald Reagan when he flew back to California, this casket of George H.W. Bush will be placed in the staff cabin of Air Force One, allowing family members time to say goodbye again as he flies and his remains fly to Texas. But we are seeing now the family. I can see President Bush just not too many feet in front of me, looking out the window at this scene unfolding here. The family members will be waiting inside in their cars for a moment as they get into position here, Wolf. But again, the flags whipping in the breeze. A poignant moment out here, again, as as George H.W. Bush takes his final leave from Andrews Air Force Base. The family now filing out of these buses and getting ready to hear "Hail to the Chief" and the 21-gun salute. Wolf?
Full military honors for the 41st President of the United States. And this presidential aircraft, it's very symbolic because President Bush 41 would fly in this Air Force One, this plane, as he was President of the United States. It was the first Air Force One that he used as President of the United States. It's now, Jake, I think it's got a special name now, Special Air Mission 41.
Right.
They're calling it, they don't call it, only if a current sitting president is aboard that presidential aircraft is it called Air Force One.
And look, this is a man who traveled the world on behalf of the United States in any manner of capacity. He was the U.S. ambassador to the United Nations. He headed the mission to China before the U.S. even had an official U.S. ambassador there. He served as head of the CIA. He served as vice president for 8 years, during a period of which he would joke about how often vice presidents were dispatched to international funerals. I think he quipped something along the lines of, if you die, I'll fly, something like that. And then, of course, as president, and a president heavily focused on international relations, no less than his 1988 opponent, Mike Dukakis, the former governor of Massachusetts, praising how he was, how wise he was as a president focused on international relations. There's his son, George W. Bush, the 43rd president, here for the final goodbye here in Washington. He's there with General Michael Howard, who's head of the command here in D.C., which includes the Honor Guard.
The family, all the family now on the tarmac, getting ready for this final departure ceremony. They'll be boarding this plane and heading off to Houston with the casket, of course. There will be more state funeral services tomorrow in Houston, and then followed by the burial at Texas A&M University, where the George H.W. Bush Presidential Library is based.
And look how George W. Bush, the 43rd president, is becoming, right before our eyes, the patriarch of the Bush family. When he came here earlier in the week and walked on the tarmac, that very same tarmac, with his brothers. He was the oldest brother of children that had come to bury their father and grieve their father, mourn their father. And today, leading that coterie of Bushes, he is the patriarch of the family, the head of the family.
It's another moment, and it's another emotional moment, and I just want to listen in and watch.
boarding the aircraft now. The flight should be about 3 or 4 hours to Houston, and then for the burial tomorrow. It is remarkable, it just feels like they came here just a few days ago. I mean, there's been so much that has taken place just over the last several days. Now to see them all as a family getting back on this plane and heading home.
And the personal tomorrow to the home chapel in Houston, then the burial. This has been the presidential part, if you will, of the farewell to their father, to the Bush family, their father who happened to be president, but most of all their father. And so now they're back to Texas, his adopted home state, the state that was so important to him. Just to watch the family get on this plane. The 747s came in as Air Force One during the George H.W. Bush presidency. He flew around the world, obviously, at a tumultuous time in them. His son used this plane as well when he was president. You see George W. Bush going up the steps right there. There's 2 of them, so I'm not sure if this is the one. George W. Bush, I went with him on a secret trip to Baghdad once, and he wanted to fly Air Force One, the 747, into Baghdad at that precarious moment, because it is the symbol of American might and democracy and glory. And it's an amazing plane. It's a privilege to cover the White House and travel with presidents. And it's pretty cool when you go to a foreign capital and people look at that plane. And so for a president, George H.W. Bush, who had domestic achievements as well, but who is better known for managing the world at an incredibly tumultuous time, a final flight home on what has become a symbol of American might in some ways, but also that flag on the back, American democracy. It's pretty cool.
I couldn't help but see a little bit of relief, particularly on Laura Bush's face. As you know, she has been standing next to her husband, literally propping him up for the last few days. Her arm under his arm the entire time. And for the first time now, I saw her relax a little bit. He had given his eulogy. This difficult part, returning to Washington, was coming to an end, and now they were taking, they were taking H.W. home, and they were all returning home, and I could just see the difference in her, and even in him, that they wanted this to go off so well, and it did for them. I think just the way Bush 41 had wanted it and had planned it, and I think that hearing the last ruffles and flourishes, and that's so emotional. And now back to living. And I think they were holding their breath for days here. And now they were exhaling a little bit.
And Anderson, I'm thinking back to what Jake Tapper was just talking about, to now see President Bush 43 as the patriarch of the family. When Jake and I were covering then Governor Bush and the campaign in 2000, and John was referencing earlier work as a journalist he'd done where, George W. Bush was kind of an enforcer in the family, a fierce protector of his dad, very defensive of his dad, his legacy, and involved in politics that way before he had kind of gotten his life together to the point where you could see his own political future. And to see him travel over time to this day, so emotional, as it was for President Bush 43 when he returned home to Midland, Texas, on the last day of his presidency, but now to pick up the mantle for his father as the patriarch of the family and of all of these years of service. It's quite a journey for him, and you can see him really wearing it with a lot of emotion today.
I felt, Anderson, today that this was not only moving for the Bush family, but for everyone there, but more importantly, for the country, for people across the country. This nation is hungry for inspiration. And I think they found that today. And the Bush family, in many ways, I think has been placed on a higher pedestal than they have been in recent years. You remember before Jeb ran, Barbara was telling people, the country is Bushed out. And it seemed that way. I think it was one of the reasons he didn't get the nomination. But nonetheless, I think today people are looking at the character and looking at George H.W. Bush and the whole family in a different light, in a positive, very positive light.
I was with members of the family last night, and they were really looking forward to this being a celebration and not a cry fest, and as they would put it. And I think they've got to be really pleased with the way it went today. This was a spectacular send-off, and I think they planned it that way, and it was beautifully executed. And I think President Bush would have been uncomfortable, as Jake was saying, too much about me, but I think it has his fingerprints all over it, and they've got to be thrilled with it.
Tim?
A week after the 1992 election, President Bush sat with Ann Simpson, Senator Simpson's wife, and had a very deep and difficult and loving conversation. And he wrote in his diary that night, he felt rejected by the baby boom generation. He felt disconnected. And he wrote, values, duty, country, service, honor, decency, all the things I really believe. We saw all of those things highlighted today, and it is a great thing for our country, and we desperately need that.
Does it have a lasting impact beyond?
Well, you know, I'm an optimist, so don't ask me. I think if John Meacham is right, and John Meacham is the poet laureate of the Bush family, but in many ways he's the historian laureate among presidential historians. If he's right, and I think he is, that's part of the American creed, so it doesn't go away.
The question is short-term or long-term. How are we having this conversation? In the short term, there are things about to happen that will test your optimism, in the sense that we're going now into a spending fight, a government shutdown fight that includes the border wall, which is something we have seen the president fight fiercely for and the Democrats fight fiercely against. So partisanship is just around the corner. We're at a key moment, some people think, getting to the top of the pyramid that is the Mueller investigation. If you're looking for bipartisanship, people coming together in that moment, I would just simply say not likely to happen. However, I think the longer term arc, to the people who have to make the big choices come January, what do they take away from today? We talked about this when Senator McCain died. Would it be a bipartisan moment? It lasted seconds or maybe a day or two. Nancy Pelosi may become Speaker. The Democrats will take power in the House. President Trump now has to decide, how do I navigate in this new world? His instinct is to fight. His instinct is to do combat from 6 a.m. on Twitter, until the end of the day. But is there a reassessment? Don't know. Wouldn't bet on it. But there is a moment here where everybody who has power and makes choices, from the president to the Democratic leadership to the Republicans who just got their you-know-what's kicked in Congress trying to decide what comes next, this is a moment of choices. We'll see which choice they make.
You know, John, what you say is everybody watching this, especially of a younger generation, the wrong thing to take away is that this is an ode to a bygone era. That's the wrong thing. The truth is that these values endure, they stand up, and the reason they're celebrated is because it's what is our American public and political life, and it is possible for it to endure. It's a tough media climate, tough political climate. We're so divided in lots of ways, but I think the pageantry of today was the enduring pageantry.
I think quickly, I know David wants to jump in quick, to the point that the Bushes have become a pariah within the Republican Party. California often tells us things the country's about to go through early, because it is so big, because it is so diverse, because it is so interesting. The environmental movement, California first, later the rest of the country. So many things. The anti-tax movement. Even in the days of Pete Wilson, the anti-immigration movement, he held power. That was the California Republican Party briefly. The Republican Party just got wiped out in California. Why? A lack of decency, a lack of common ground, a lack of treatment of immigrants with respect. And so what decisions do the other Republicans make at this moment? Are they going to stay on Team Trump to the end, or do they start thinking about the Republican Party after Trump? And the people who came to power in Orange County, for example, during the Bush years, in the Bush Republican Party, who want at least a path to legal status, if not a path to citizenship, for example, who don't mind having a drink or a dinner and have a conversation with a Democrat. Those people are gone. And so what lesson will the Republican Party learn from what just happened to it in California, in suburban America? Is there a short term we have to stick to Trump, or do they start to have a reassessment? That's one of the many choices that are about to happen.
Yeah, but I want to come back to this, David. I agree with you. The values are still out there, but we've been slipping away. This generation, the World War II generation, increasingly seems like from a vanished world. Yeah. And what's encouraging is that a lot of people in the younger generation today, I think, are like the new people elected to Congress. There's a lot of idealism in that group.
And a lot of veterans now.
A lot of veterans in that